We'll do a review in Likutei Sichos in Chelik Lamed Aleph. This is the first Sicha for the Parshas Yisro. In this Sicha, the Rebbe discusses the Torah was given in the beginning of the Parsha of Aseres Adibris. The Torah talks about giving the Torah Lebeis Yaakov, which means the women, and Lebnei Yisrael, which means the men. Two categories. And the Rebbe goes through a lot of detail, the way it's brought down in the Mechilta, and then the way it is brought down in the Medrash Rabbah. And the Rebbe reconciles between the Medrash Rabbah and Mechilta. The Rebbe shows us what the Medrash Rabbah goes like the first shot in the Mechilta, not like the second one, all the details. But the uh, point that the Rebbe is going to bring out is the women, according to the Mechilta, they got more than the men. They got the generality, the essence of Torah. The Rebbe explains that women are connected to the essence, and therefore Judaism depends on who the mother is. The child is determined by the mother because women get the essence. And when the Mechilta says that they were given the Roshei Devorim, the headlines, it doesn't mean they were only headlines, but on the contrary, they were given the headlines, which includes everything, as the Rebbe will speak about. Sometimes the headlines means more, meaning inclusive, or sometimes headlines means just headlines, which would mean giving less, as the Rebbe will explain in detail. We'll go step by step. Yisro, Aleph. Now, it says here in the note that this is not just for the Parshas Yisro, but also V'chov Beis Shvat. Of course, Chov Beis Shvat is the yortzeit of the Rebbetzin Hatzidkonis Moras Chaim Mushka, who's the daughter of the Rebbe Friedrich Rebbe, Olav Hashalom Zal, and she is the wife of Yibod Chaim Tovim of the Rebbe. This is by the publisher. Now, of course, the Sicha was actually said in Tafshin Dalad Mem, that Rebbetzin was still around then, but later on, when they published this Sicha, from the Sicha of Tafshin Dalad Mem, this was done in honor of also Chav Beishvat, the yahrzeit of the Rebbetzin. And it's understood because this Sicha discusses the great connection and the higher connection to Torah from the women even more than the men, and this was an appropriate sort of uh, memorial or remembering the Rebbetzin, the righteous Rebbetzin, on her yahrzeit on Chav Beis Shvat. We'll look inside and we'll go step by step. Aleph. Al haposik koisoymar libeis Yaakov v'sagid libnei Yisrael. So there's two expressions before Matan Torah. The Eibishter says, say so to the house of Yaakov, and Tagid, say it to the sons of Israel. So, Bnei Yisrael would mean sons of Israel, that would mean men, and Beis Yaakov means woman. So we find it's the house of Yaakov. Isa b'Mechilta, so in the Mechilta on the Pasuk, we find it says like this: Koisoymar lebeis Yaakov, who is what are the two categories? Lebeis Yaakov and Bnei Yisrael. Koisoymar lebeis Yaakov, elu hanoshim. That is referencing the women. Vesagid libnei Yisrael elu hanoshim. And who does it refer to when it says libnei Yisrael? Sagid. This is the Bnei Yisrael, this is the men. So this basically describes who this was said to. It was said to the women, and it was said to the men. But then the Mechilta says, Davar Achar, another interpretation, Koi Soimar Lebeis Yaakov Beloshin Rako. Now, this explains not to who it was said, but how it was said. Because the Torah also changes from Koi Soimar to Vesagid. It doesn't say Koisemer Libeis Yaakov v'Libnei Yisrael, or Koisemer Libeis Yaakov v'Soimer Libnei Yisrael, changes from Koisemer and Sagit. So the Mechilta says another interpretation. Why is it say over here Toimar? Toimar is a soft language. Koisemer Libeis Yaakov v'Lashon Rako. When it says so say, in a way of Omer, meaning Lebeis Yaakov, to the women you have to say it soimar, gently, Beloshen Rako in a soft language. And the Mechilta translate, what do we mean by a soft language? Emoir Roshe Dvorim Lenoshim. Say the headlines, say it to the women. And then Visagid Libnei Yisrael. Over here we change to Visagid. Visagid Libnei Yisrael means Vitedagdek imohem, and that you should be particular with them, which means details. So for the women, it was soft because you only gave them the headlines. And giving them the headlines, this is called soft, meaning it's gentle, not to burden them with all of the details. And Sagid Libnei Yisrael, the Dagdik Imam, go into all the particulars. So we have here two explanations. One explains who the Beis Yaakov is and who the Bnei Yisrael. Then the Mechilta says another interpretation. How do we say it to the Beis Yaakov? We say it in a soft way. We say in just a gentle way. We say just the headlines. And the Bnei Yisrael, you give it tagid, you give it with all the details. But it doesn't seem like these are two interpretations. These two things that are quoted here in the Mechilta seem to be addressing different parts, who the Beis Yaakov and Bnei Yisrael are, and how it's said to them. So why does it say Dovar Achar, another interpretation? B'tzorich biur. So the Rebbe says we need to explain this. Meloshin ha-Mechilta Dovar Achar chulu. The fact that the Mechilta says another interpretation, muchach. So from this, it's evidence, yesh kan shnei perushim, that we have two interpretations over here, because you're saying another Dovar Achar. B'tomua. So this is surprising. Ma heim shnei ha-perushim, because of what are the two? How do we have two explanations here? These are not different explanations. It seems to be two different areas that we're addressing. The Betchila Mefarish, in the beginning, the Mechilta explains Mi Heim Beis Yaakov. He tells you who are the Beis Yaakov. Those are Ubnei Yisrael. Who are they? So it says Elu Hanoshim, that's the Beis Yaakov. Elu Hanoshim, that's the Bnei Yisrael. That's the first address. And then the Pasuk explains, the Mechilta explains how this speech went, how Hashem spoke to Beis Yaakov, and it was Beloshoin Rako, in a soft language, Rosh Dvorim, Yisrael, and the way it was said to the Bnei Yisrael over there, it's the Dagdik Imam, you have to be particular. So basically, we don't see here two separate Pirushim, but we see addressing different aspects from the explaining the pasuk, who wore the Beis Yaakov and Bnei Yisrael, and how it was said in a way of Seimer, in a way of Rakad, in a way of Tagit, strong. The Rebbe will explain later on. I just wanted to bring it here because there's going to be a lot piled up over here to keep the distinction. The Rebbe is going to explain that the difference is why the are two categories. Why is this two interpretations? Whether the reason why we have to divide it into uh, two categories instead of saying speak to all of Bnei Yisrael. Why are we making here separations? Beis Yisrael, Bnei Yisrael, Yaakov, Beis Yaakov. Why do we need to talk about in two categories? So, according to the first shot of the Mechilta, the necessity is because who you're talking to. If you're talking to women, is one way you talk. So, because we need to talk to women and to men, that determines how we should talk. So, it's the recipient that is the reason why we're splitting it up. Why is the pasuk splitting it up? Because here we're talking about two categories. We're talking about Beis Yisrael, Beis Yaakov. We're talking about Yidden, women. We're talking about men, and therefore we have to split it up. The Davar Achar is telling us no. It's not because of the recipients, but it's because that's the way the Torah is transmitted. So therefore it says that first the Torah has to be transmitted in a way of Rashi Dvorim. That's because that's the transmission of Torah. First it goes with Noshim and Sagid, and then it goes details. So you take first the headlines and then the detail. That's the way you transmit the Torah. As the Rebbe will speak about Riches. I'm just mentioning it here. This will be the answer. So why is it two separate pshatim? The pshat, it's two different pshatim. Why was it split up? Was it split up because of the listeners, because of the whom we're giving the Torah, so we have to split it up for their purposes. According to the second shot in the Mechilta, we're splitting it up because that's the way the transmission of Torah. First, the Torah needs to be taught in Rosh Dvarim, and then the Torah is taught in the specifics, as we will see later on. Okay, but that's one question. I gave the answer from later on, but the question right now is why does the Mechilta say Dovar Achar, how is it different? And the explanation that the Rebbe will give. And now the Rebbe brings in a Medrash. The Medrash Rebbe says it a little differently. And the question is, what does the Medrash Rebbe mean? It seems like the Medrash Rebbe, as we learned it in the beginning, follows the second interpretation of the Mechilta. And the Rebbe is going to say, no, actually, the Medrash Rebbe follows the first interpretation of the Mechilta. But let's look inside. The Medrash Rebbe ala Posik Isa, in the Medrash Rebbe, on the Posik we find, over there it says, Koisoymar lebeis Yaakov elu hanoshim. There's no two pshatim here, there's just one pshat. Koisoymar lebeis Yaakov elu hanoshim. So that's going to the women. Amar lahem. So he says to Amar Loi. So the Eivshter says to Moshe, Koi soymar libnei Yaakov, Emer lehem rosh dvarim sheim yecholus lishmaya. Speak to them the headlines which they can hear. In other words, that there is a level what they can hear. Speak to them. V'sagid libnei Yisrael, and then the second speak to the bnei Yisrael, to the men, El Hanoshim. Amar lei, Hashem says to Moshe, Emer lehem duke dvarim, shehem yichelum l'shmaya. You say to them the particulars of the matters which they can hear. So it it seems like the Medrash Rabbah is also saying the same thing as the second shot, or a combination, the Rebbe says, of the first and the second shot, because he talks specifically what the men can hear and the women can hear, and what the men can hear, which is the Davar Achar says also that there is Lashon Raka, and and Tedagdikim Upumriya Tonira, as you when you run first glance, Nira, it appears Shazeo Kapiru Hashasheni b'Mechilta. That's like the second Pirush who says that it was spoken in a soft way, in a hard way, but Oiherkev shows Pirushim, or maybe a combination, because we didn't even really understand in the Mechilta why is there two Pirushim. It seems like, but here he does divide it up into men and women, and also, but mainly what we're discussing here, because the Medrash Rabbah explains that there's differences what the women can hear, and we say Rosh Dvorim. That's what it says also in the second shot of the Mechilta. It says Emer Rosh Dvorim. But uh, um, and for the men, you speak hard. So it seems like the Medrash Rabbah goes along with what the second, the Dover Achar and the Mechilta seem almost to say the same thing. The only difference is, Rebbe says, but then we see like this, that in the Rebbe actually says, no, we can't say that, because first of all, the Medrash amidst the words Lashon Rakav. Yesh Loven Kavanas HaMedrash. We have to, let's try to understand what really the Medrash is saying here. Aleph, Shemashmit Haloshin Beloshin Rakav. He doesn't say softly. The Mechilta in the Dovar Achar uses the Loshin to the women speak softly. In the Medrash, it just says, say to them the Rosh Dvorim that they can hear. It doesn't say speak to them softly. So there's no softly over there. Base. And number two, in the Medrash, it changes in the Mechilta. Mechilta says softly, but in the Medrash it says, Moisiv Shem, Beis Shem Yuchelos L'Shmoya. Say to them that which they can accept, that they can hear. Also by the men it says, Moisiv Shem Yuchelos L'Shmoya. So we hear, he talks about what they are able, the capacity of the people, what they're able to hear. It's doesn't say Lashon Raka, and it doesn't, and he says Masha Yechelu L'Shmoya. So what would seem? So the Rebbe says, so if you look at these languages, appears the Mechilta v'Hamedrash pligi ma Amar Moshe l'Noshim, that the Mechilta and the Medrash disagree. What exactly did Moshe say to the women? The Hamedrash Amar lahem rak Rosh Dvorim. He only told them the headlines, meaning didn't tell them everything. Didn't tell them. And the Ilula Mechilta Omar Gam Dvorim Rakim. So, according to the Mechilta, he didn't just him, but he also told them matters, but the items that are soft, easy, gentle. Kamesha Kosuv, The Mefarshim, as said in the Mefarshim, the Hainu Divrei Pius, he told them words of appeasement, Koloimar, Hasbaras, Milas, Hamitzvus, Uschar, Kiyum, and Chulu. Uh, Explain to them the advantage of doing mitzvahs, the reward you get for observing mitzvahs. So, in addition to the Mechilta, again, in addition to the second, the Mechilta, we're talking the second, in addition to the Mechilta that says that he told them the headlines, that's in the Medrash Rabbah as well. Both of them said the Rosh Dvarim, the Mechilta says also that you spoke to them b'Loshen Raka. What is this Loshen Raka? Meaning you also spoke to them matters that are easy and convincing and appeasing so that they want to do the mitzvahs, which means you told them the Ma'alos HaMitzvahs and the Schar Kiyumam. So that according to the Medrash Rabbah, he didn't speak, the Medrash Rabbah doesn't have the words Raka because he didn't speak him those words. And according to the Mechilta, he also spoke Lashon Raka. Uh, yeah, this is explained. That doesn't, however, explain the words of Shem Yechedum Lishmaya. Well, this we'll see later. But right now, we're just trying to make a distinction. What exactly did he say to them? That according to the Medrash, he didn't speak Divrei Piyus. He only told them Rosh Dvarim. And according to the Mechilta, was Divrei Piyus. And now the Rebbe is going to say, by the way, in Rashi, it seems the Rebbe says that Divrei Piyus, in which also is said in the Mechilta, would include both, would include Roshi Dvarim and uh, and uh, uh, and Divrei Piyus, and but we see that from Rashi. In the Medrash, we're saying that it doesn't say Piyus over there, so there's no Loshen Raka over there. The Medrash doesn't use the word Loshen Raka, so there is no Divrei Piyus over there. But in Rashi's use of the language Loshen Raka seems like that would include both. Yesh lahoisiv shemipirush Rashi ala Torah mashma, that in Rashi's commentary on the Torah appears the Loshen Raka koilel shnei inyonim. When we say speak the Loshen Raka, that would include both, which means hein divrei pius, both words of pius, uh, and also vehein the Rashi Dvarim, and also Rashi Dvarim. So, as is in the Mechilta, but the Mechilta says he spoke to them both, but it says Loshen Raka and Rashi Dvarim. But in Rashi, it's both included in the language in Lashon Raka, because in the Mechilta Dover Achar, it says Beloshen Raka, and then he says a separate Dvarim, Rosh Dvarim Lenoshim. So there is two separate, and in the Medrash it only says Rosh Dvarim. There's no Lashon Raka, but in Rashi the Rebbe points out the Lashon Raka seems to include both in Yonim. It's both Pius and also Rosh Dvarim. What's the connection between Rosh Dvarim and Lashon Raka if it's only Rosh Dvarim? As the Rebbe will explain now, because I mean, how is it included in Lashon Raka, the idea of Rashi Dvarim is because it's easier to not to burden. That's Lashon Haka. Let's look inside. Yes, Lahaisiv. It's a lot of detailed over here, but yes, Lahaisiv. Shemepirish Rashi ala Torah mashma the Lashon Rashi koilul shnei yorim. Over there, Rashi seems that the language to say Lashon Raka Softa would include two. Hein divrei pius, both words of pius, uh, which we're translating now. Rashi, the Mechilta doesn't use the word uh, pius. He just says Lashon Raka. We interpret it that Lashon Raka means divrei pius, as the Mefarshim explained. But but the in Rashi, it seems like Rashi uses that both. It is divrei pius and rosh dvarim shegam heim nikroim lashon raka. That also we can refer to rosh dvarim as a soft language. Uh, when it says that when Rashi used the word lashon raka means both pius and rosh dvarim. Kivan shekalo avino because they're easy to understand. Now, in Rashi itself, we don't see Rashi using both languages, but we understand from the uh, comparison, the way to the men, what is considered the not Lashon Raka, we will understand what the Lashon Raka is. Let's look slowly, go into Rashi. This is the language that Rashi on the Pasuk. Lebeis Yaakov. So Rashi says, Elu Anoshim Toi Mar Lahem B'Lashon Raka. Speak to them softly. So exactly what does it mean, speak softly? So maybe it just means speak softly, mean divrei pius, tell them nice things about what the Torah. No. But then Rashi continues and says, "V'sagid lebnei Yisrael," and by sagid lebnei Yisrael, which is the opposite of lashon raka, onshim v'digdukim parish lizchorim, the punishments, the particulars. We're saying both things, the punishment and the particulars, parish lizchorim. Dvarim hakoshim kigidim. Why is the lotion of tagid? Tagid is things that are as hard as gidim. Gidim uh, are hard. Hainu. So what that means is, so Hainu. So what do we see from this? Aleph shaloi pirush the loshon raka. Rashi did not elaborate, articulate what does it mean lashon raka. He just says telem lashon raka. So we don't see exactly what Rashi just says softly uh, and base, but in the opposite, betagid lebnei Yisrael kosav he writes einshim v'digdukim. So both einshim v'digdukim mashma ktsas. So from this it appears the mefarish that Rashi explains the Lashon Raka l'noshim ke'loshnei inyonim. That the soft language Rashi, when Rashi says Lashon Raka, this includes both inyonim because the opposite of Beis Yisrael with Aleph Hafcham Shel Einshim, the opposite of punishment. Rashi says Einshim v'digdukim. Einshim the Hainish Amar Schoran Shel Mitzvah. That would be the opposite of Einshim that he said to the man. And Dikdukim Hafcham Shel Dikdukim Rak Amira v'Dibur Klolim Kol Al HaMitzvahs, just a saying in general, the general of the mitzvahs and not the particular. Okay, so this is just bringing down what the meaning of Lashon Raka. The Rebbe brought down from the Mefarshim that what does it mean in the Mechilta. The Rebbe brought down. What does it mean Rakim, what does it mean that he should speak to them? B'Lashon Raka in the Mechilta, what does it mean? So the Rebbe brought down that in the Mechilta, the Mefarshim explained that it means the words of pious. And the Rebbe says that in Rashi, the Lashon Raka appears to mean both words of pious, meaning reward and encouragement for Torah mitzvahs, but also it means Rosh Dvarim, and they're called Lashon Raka. They're included as part of Lashon Raka because it's easier and it's softer because you can get it more than having all the details. But nevertheless, this is a very side point. Sometimes, in learning the Sikha, you get a little bit sidetracked by the side point. So we have to stay focused on the Sikha over here. The main point of the Sikha is that in the Medrash and the Mechilta seem to be differing what Moshe Rabbeinu told them. Whether Moshe Rabbeinu also told them Dvorim Rakim, as in the Mechilta, he says, he told them, B'Lashoin Raka, he told them all matters in addition to the Rosh Dvorim. And according to the Medrash, there's no Lashon Raka, he omits Lashon Raka. He only told them uh, the Rosh Dvorim. There's no Divrei Pius over there. There's no Lashon Raka in the Medrash Rabbah. So we need to understand Tam Pluktas HaMechilta, the reason of the argument of the Mechilta HaMedrash. Im Omar Lenoshim Rak Roshi Dvorim. According to the Medrash, he only said to them the Roshi Dvorim. Or according to the Mechilta, the second Pshat in the Mechilta, Gam Dvorim Rakim. Al Dvar Schar Mitzvahs, he also told him. So basically, the way the Rebbe concludes that according to the Mechilta, he spoke to the women two things. He told them the headline of the mitzvahs, the Rosh Dvarim. He also spoke to them about the Divrei Pius, about encouragement for Torah mitzvahs. And according to the Medrash, all what he did was tell them the Rosh Dvarim. There is no mention, there's nothing about Lashon Raka, there's nothing about Divrei Pius. Why is it? Why does the Medrash disagree and say that it didn't talk about the Divrei Pius as it says in the Mechilta? What's the difference? What's the reason for that? That's one question. And Gam Yesh L'Dagdik and Gam Yesh L'Dayik, Rebbe says also we can make a point to the look into the way it's written in the Medrash and the Mechilta. Medrash maschil elu hanoshim. In the Medrash, he begins when it says on the pasuk Kaiseimar, he starts off by saying elu hanoshim. So first note, ve'achar kach mefaret, and then he details and he says to them, Emer lahem roshi dvorim chulu. Then he tells them what you should say in Rosh Dvarim. V'chein v'v'sagid l'bnei Yisrael. The same thing also when it comes to the bnei Yisrael. First he says who. He says Faresh tchila eila anoshim. V'achar kach mafaret toichen hadiburin emer lahem digdukei dvarim. And then he says what you tell them. So first he says who, and then he says what she told them. V'ilu b'mechilta b'pirush hasheni. We're talking about the second pirush. Maschil b'toichen hadiburim. Over there, he starts off talking about how the Lashon Raka, and then he concludes that that is for the women. It says in the Mechilta, Davar Achar, Koisoimer libnei Yaakov, he says B'Lashon Raka emei Rosh Dvarim, and then it says Lenoshim. First, he says what you speak of, Misagi libnei Yisrael. It goes to Bnei Yisrael, and then he says how you speak to them. So these is another difference between the Medrash and the Mechilta. And one will see that this is actually the key difference between the Mechilta and the Medrash is why did the Eibishter make it two categories over here? According to the Mechilta, second shot in the Mechilta, according to the Mechilta, it has to do with the recipients. Uh, no, I'm sorry. It is, according to the Mechilta, it has to be done in the way that, uh, uh, according to the second shot in the Mechilta, uh, the difference. Why is it done? It's the way that the Torah has to be transmitted. And that's the Mechilta in the second pshat. The Torah needs to have first the klal. It's not because of the recipient. It's because of not because these are women, these are men. It's because that's the way the Torah has to be given, and that's why it doesn't start off. These are the men, these are the women, because it's not about the men and the women. It's the way the Torah has to be given. And then who is it given like that? That's to the women, and then it goes to the men. But according to the Medrash, as the Rebbe will explain, it's mainly divided like that because we have to give it to the women. They have to give them what they can hear. The men. Okay, let's look inside. It's a little, again, a little confusing because it's very detailed, but let's look inside. Base. So we can say the Rebbe said, what is the point of the explanation here? First, the Rebbe is going to address the disagreement between the Dovar Achar within the Mechilta. See, the Rebbe brings in the Mechilta and he asked, why is there two Pshatim? And he wanted to know why the two Pshatim Mechilta. Then the Rebbe brings in, piles up on top of that, the disagreement from the Medrash. So this makes it a little bit, we have to halt and cup as now we're going back to explain what is the two interpretations in the Mechilta. And once we'll explain the two interpretations in the Mechilta, we'll actually see that the Medrash is not explaining the second pshat of the Mechilta, but the Medrash goes like the first pshat in the Mechilta. So first and foremost, we have to understand what the Mechilta is saying. And after we'll understand what the Mechilta is saying, we'll see that the Medrash is actually the first pshat of the Mechilta. I mean, we don't even know how the first and the second pshat and the Mechilta disagree. We don't understand why Dover Achad, but that's what we're going to explain. What's the difference between the first pshat of the Mechilta and the second pshat of the Mechilta? And once we see the Chilik, we'll actually be able to explain that the Medrash, even though the language is very similar to what is in the second pshat of the Mechilta, is really goes like the first pshat of the Mechilta. So for now, let's just concentrate on understanding what's the difference between the first pshat of the Mechilta and the second pshat of the Mechilta. Why are they dover ach? So, the point of the explanation is Shnei hapirushim b'mechilta chalukim ba'atam. The two interpretations of mechilta differ. What is the reason shein yonei haTorah nemru b'shnei afanim? Why is the Torah's matters? Why is it said? This is the issue here. It says toimar v'sagid. Why is there two separate sayings over here? So lepirush rishon, according to the first shot of the Mechilta, Sibas Ischal Kuzu Himitzad Mekable HaTorah. The reason why there is a difference is because there's different recipients. Different recipients, we have to transmit the Torah differently, which is Elu HaNoshim, Elu HaNoshim. Women need to be Soimar. Men need to be Sagi. This is because they're different character traits of the man and the woman. The achiluk betchunas nafsham shel noshim vanoshim, the difference in the characters, the soul of the women and the men, hevi shnei efanim sugim b'mesiras divrei Torah. That brought about two different ways, two categories, the way the Torah was given over, because to address the two categories of people. That is the reason why it says Soimar and Sagit, because to address the needs of the recipients. Mashenkin lepirush hasheni, as opposed to the second interpretation, hachiluk be'oifun mesidas haTorah, the difference between how the Torah was given over, yisoidoi behachefza shel hadivrei Torah. The basis for that is the object of Torah is given over in different ways. The chen nidrash mitzad Torah, because so we learn from the Torah. The Torah says that there is a way that Torah has to be transmitted. Shetchila tzrichim limsoy roshi dvorim shel Torah. First, you need to have soimar. You need to have roshi dvorim. Berak achar kach es hadikdukim. And then you have to say the particulars. So the way you transmit, you need to have first the generality of Torah, and then go to the detail. V'achar kach moisiv hakosuf, and then the pasuk adds. That's something way Torah needs to be transmitted in a general and in a particular way. Now the Torah adds shnei sugim elu b'divrei Torah mischalkim l'shnei sugim b'nei Yisrael. That these two categories, the words of Torah, are also divided into two categories. Mekabla Torah, koi soimar. So here we have the koi soimar, loshen rako, roshen dvorim. Though you have a soft language, which is it starts off. It doesn't start with the men, women. It starts off with the way Torah is transmitted. It has a Loshen Rako, which is Roshi Dvorim, which is the headlines. That's Lebeis Yaakov Lenoshim. V'sagit Lebnei Yisrael v'tagdik imam. That comes to Digdu. Basically, because the Mechilta's first interpretation is men, women. That's the two categories of Sagid, of Soimer and Sagid. The second begins not with the who are the recipients. The second one begins how Torah is transmitted, that you have it in a way of Loshe Raka, Rosh Dvarim, you have it in the headlines, and then comes the Vesagid, then comes the Tadagdik Imam, and because of that, there's two categories of people, which is more appropriate. So now that the first interpretation is mainly who gets it, so that fits actually with the Medrash. That the Medrash does not come as it seems from the superficial language. Like the second interpretation of Mechilta, El Adrab, but on the contrary. He explains and articulates the first explanation of Mechilta. Shetam is Chalkuzu, that why is there such a difference? that you say you start Elu Hanoshim, which is the first one Mechilta. The mainly thing is the Eberster gives two categories. One is for the men and one is for the women. Why is that the two categories that we change the Lashon for? Rashi just, the Medrash adds, why did we divide it? Because that's what they have the ability to listen to. Kulaima. As to say, mitzad Torah atzmo, because we're saying ein hechrich shetiya chalukah zu. This is not a necessary division from the Torah itself. Torah itself, you don't need soymar and sagit. Torah itself could be otherwise, but here, uh, it's not part of Torah. This is because in the Makablim, since we have to give the Torah to Bnei Israel, Anoshim Benoshim, men and women, Lachein Cholak Moshes Mesiris HaTorah L'chol Sug. That's why he gave it to every category, L'fi Mashu Yochel L'shmoya, based on what they can accept. So it's the recipients, as the first shot of the Mechilta, it's the recipients of the Torah that determine why the Torah gave in two categories is because the women can only accept this and the men can accept that. And that's why we say Soimar. We say first the to the women, this is the what they can accept, and then for the men, and that's the two categories. And the fact the Rebbe says that it does say in the Medrash, it uses the language of the Mechilta, also that says, give them the Rosh Devarim. The Rebbe argues that the Rosh Devarim is not the same in the Mechilta as it is in the Medrash. The Rebbe will explain that in the Medrash, the Rosh Devarim is less. Only what they can, Rosh Devarim is less, meaning only what they can absorb. It's the headlines. In the uh, in the Mechilta, the Rosh Dvarim means the headlines means that includes everything. Let's look inside. There's no contradiction to this Mahosha Gam Medrash Nokatei Salosh Mechilta, that in the Medrash uses the same language in Mechilta Rosh Dvarim Umashma. So since he says that also for the by the women, he says Rosh Dvarim Mashma Shalishneim Hamechilta Pirush Habez Medrash. So it comes out that the both of them Nemru Oisom Hadvorim Lenoshim. The same words were said for the Noshim. Here the Rebbe is saying that according to the Medrash, according to the Rebbe is saying that it goes like the first shot of the Mechilta, the Medrash, so it turns out that he didn't tell them everything. But according to the language, Rosh Dvarim seems like, according to the second shot of the Mechilta and the Medrash, told them the same thing. The Rebbe says, "Ki loy hare Rosh Dvarim shebe Medrash kan Rosh Dvarim shebe Mechilta." These are not the same Rosh Dvarim. The Rosh Dvarim in the Medrash, it's limiting. The Rosh Dvarim are limiting. They're saying he only told them the Rosh Dvarim to the women because that's all they can handle. In the Mechilta, it wasn't about the women, but what they can handle or not. In the Mechilta, the way the Torah is transmitted, first we have to give the Rosh Dvarim, and then we have to give the details. And then it divided into the two categories. Again, it's the Medrash, as the Rebbe learns, goes together with the the Medrash Rabbah goes together with the first shot of the Mechilta. In the first shot of the Mechilta, women cannot get much as men, and therefore Moshe had to divide it, Elu Hanoshim, what they can get. All what they can get is the Rosh Dvarim. The Rebbe will explain now in Gimel. And therefore, Moshe Rabbeinu divided Elu Hanoshim, Elu. That was the key. The key was, why is it Soimar? Why is it Sagit? Because we need to go by the recipients of Torah. And therefore, the Rosh Dvarim, in this context, what the Medrash says, means just a little bit, a headline, not the whole thing. That's the ability of the women to receive. And the second shot of the Mechilta says, no, it's really the way the Torah needs to be transmitted. And first, it needs to be Rosh Dvarim. According to the Rosh Dvarim means we give them the general rule, and then we follow into the details, as the Rebbe will articulate it now in Ois Gimel. Hasbaras Ha'inyan, the Rebbe explains this idea. Begeder Roshi Dvarim Shnei Afanim. First of all, the Rebbe wants to define what is the definition of Roshi Dvarim. There's two ways. Either the headlines means less, only a little, or the headlines means including everything. Aleph. Number one, the Roshi Dvarim is al derech maimer chazal. This would be similar to the saying of our sages, la'olam yishana odom litalmidei derech kitzara. A person should always teach his students in a short way, which means, what does it mean over there in a short way? If you want the student to understand, you can't give him the whole thing. You got to give him a little bit. The Rav haloi medim talmidei. A teacher who's teaching his student. Tzorich litzamtzem es kol arichas shakla v'tarye v'ribu haprotim needs to restrict the entire length of the debate, the give and take, and all the details. B'tech Rosh Dvarim, he has to include that, he has to restrict it in the headlines. Dvarim kitzorim speaks short words. Kidei, that's derech kitzora, what is it? So you should be able to receive them. So that means Rosh Dvarim means restricted the knowledge, restricted the idea to fit the vessels, to fit the ability of the student to receive them. Beis, then there's another one of Rosh Dvarim, which means Shem Adrabah. They're not restricted. Haklal shemimenu mistafim kol protoinyan. That would be the general from which all the details branch out. V'alderech loshen haMishnah. This would be like we say the language of the Mishnah. Shehu dover kotzer v'koilin yonim rabim. The Mishnah is referred to, it's short, which includes many topics. It's not restricted, but it's short, that includes everything in it. So kol prota shakle v'tari shebigemore nirmozim b'l'shoin Mishnah, that the entire debate and give and take that's in the Gemara are all hinted in the language of the Mishnah. So it's a Rosh Dvarim which includes a lot. And this is actually, like we find, this is the Mishnah, but we find v'chein matzinu gam b'matan Torah. Also we find this by Matan Torah. Shebetchila nitnu aseres hadibris. First were the 10 Commandments. Shehem, the 10 sayings. Shehem klolus kol haTorah kula. They're the generality of all the Torah. It's Rosh Dvarim. The kol Taryag mitzvahs b'chlal aseres hadibris saying. All the 630 mitzvahs are included in the 10 sayings. From the Rashi Mishpati. Ubezegufa, Rak Shnei Dibris Harishonis, and even within the 10, which include all of the Torah, There's even a Rashi Dvarim, there's even a generality is within the 10 saying Rak Shnei Dibros Harishonos. It was only the first two sayings, Anochi v'lo Yiloch v'pi Agvura Shemana, which we heard directly from Hashem. Kihem Klolus Kol HaTorah Kula. Because they are the Anochi and Lo become the generality of all the Torah. The Anochi is Koil Kol Ramach Mitzvahs Aseh. Anochi would include the saying of Anochi, includes all 248 positive mitzvahs. And V'lo Yilcho Koil Kol Shesat Mitzvahs Lei says that would include all 365 prohibitions. Kizeu Seider Nesinas HaTorah, because this is the order the Torah was given. Shas Chalosa Hi Bamiris HaKlolim. The Torah starts off by saying the generality. The Rosh Dvarim, the topics, the beginning, the headlines, Shebem Nichlolim Kol HaPratim, which all details are included, and that's the way you transmit it. So it's not the restricted, but it's just to transmit. You start by the general, and then you go to the details. You have the 630 mitzvahs, you have the 10 sayings, and then you have the two sayings. And the Rebbe says now, this gives us, since we're saying this is the way that it's being transmitted, it gives us another explanation that it says that first the Rebbe gave all the 10 sayings together, but nobody can hear that. And then the Rebbe went and separated. If the Rebbe was going to separate each one of the sayings separately, why did he say it first all at once? Because that's the means of transmitting things, that you start off with a generality and then you articulate. Based on this explanation, we can explain Masha Omer Razal, our sages of blessed memory, tell us originally, the Eibishter spoke all 10 sayings in one saying. But only later on, all these sayings were individually said, each dibur, each saying by themselves. That he went back and they articulated for each saying and saying by itself. So if the Eibishter went and later on articulated, why did he have to say it all together? It seems surprising. Since he went back to articulate each saying on its own, what was the reason that I needed to say it first in one saying? The person can't hear it. That's why you have to say it again, because we couldn't really hear it. This is the order, the way the Torah is given from Hashem. First, there is the big rule. Of older, the general is only even one saying. Then the Torah comes in details. First to 10 sayings, called Dibur Fnei Atzma, each one by themselves. So first the Eibishter just spoke everything, as the Gemara says, and then it goes each one by himself. Then it's split further to 630 mitzvahs. That's the order, the way the Torah is transmitted, and a general into more detail. And then once we have the 630 mitzvahs, you have a tremendous amount, a ribui prota mitzvahs, detailed the mitzvahs, ad valomis and mispar, to the extent we say alomis haloches, there's no end, there's so much. So these are the transmission. Zehu hachilik bein Rosh Dvarim. This is the difference, the way the word Rosh Dvarim is shebe mechilta. What the mechilta uses, that he told them the Rosh Dvarim, that's the generality. Rosh Dvarim shebe medrash. B'shneim medubar b'klal shebe Torah. They're all talking about the Rosh Dvarim, the generality of Torah. Elo shebe medrash koyi b'kloli ha-Torah. But the medrash talks about the in the generality of Torah, sheheim anoshim yichelus tishmoya. Over there, it was made to measure for the women that they can hear. Those are the short words which a student can receive. The kivon shenoshim daiton kitzora. We have to adjust it to the women, since the women minds is short. L'chein evrim lahem rak rosh dvarim. That's why you can only tell them rosh dvarim. Rosh dvarim is constricting, it's restricting how much, a little bit, not a lot of the details of the particulars. Ve'ilu rosh dvarim b'mechilta, but in the rosh dvarim b'mechilta, hainu rosh dvarim be'etzem. We're talking about things that are in essence generalities. Klola haTorah, those are rules of the Torah general Torah, shemehem istaifim kol prot haTorah, from which all the details of the Torah branch out. So the Medrash goes like the first pshat in the Mechilta. They only gave them what they can hear, and that's why it's Beis Yaakov and Beis Yisro, which goes by the recipient. But the second pshat of the Medrash, he gave them the generality because that's the way it is, the Torah is transmitted. But why give this to the women and to the men? They should say, yes, you have to have uh, the Rosh Prokim, and the Sagit is the Dukim. But why change it, this to men, this to women? So the Rebbe Excel, come on, that when we talk about this generality of Torah, this is the elevation of women, that only women, or it's more connected to the woman, the generality of Torah, as the Rebbe will continue to explain now. Please, Galit. So now the Rebbe says, so there's a big fundamental difference between the Mechilta and the Medrash and the connection for a woman to Torah. According to the Medrash, they were giving only Ma'ashehin Yecholos L'Shmoya. They were given a condensed, a restricted, just a little bit. But according to the Mechilta, they were actually given everything. There was the Klal, Dalit. Al Pizeh Nimtza Sheyesh Hevdel Yisoidi Ben HaMechilta VeHaMedrash. There turns out to be a fundamental difference between the Mechilta and the Medrash in the way that women are connected l'divrei Torah, to the words of the Torah. According to the Medrash, what was given to the women was all what they can hear, only what they can hear, what they can take. So what does that mean? Those are things that are connected to them. As opposed to the Mechilta, in which the condition that they are able to listen to, they can get it. It's not mentioned there. So on the contrary, Niten lenoshim ha'etzem shel Torah kloleho. To the women was given the essence of Torah and the generality of Torah, the Rosh Dvarim. From those etzem of Torah, the Rosh Dvarim, branch out the details that went to the men. They got the main thing, but the women got it. That they can say there's also a difference in with regards. We know that a mitzvah say which are time bound, which have to be done at a specific time. So the din is that women are exempt from those mitzvahs. And likewise, v'chein Talmud Torah shenoshim peturis mitzvahs Talmud Torah, also Talmud Torah, which we learn from the pasuk, they're exempt, even though it's not time bound, but still they're exempt. So these mitzvahs, now that we're saying that the klolus was given to women also, makes a big difference. According to the Medrash, to begin with, they never were given this. They're not at all commanded on them. Ki lo nitin lahem elo ma she'michelos l'shmoya. Because to them, to the women, was only given that which they can hear. Mashenkin la mechilta, as opposed to the mechilta kivon shenitin lahem rosh dvarim. Since they were given the headlines, Hainu klolo kol ha-Torah kulo, they were given the generality of all the Torah, including all the mitzvahs. Hare shayochis heinu l'chol ha-Torah kulo, so they have a connection to all of Torah. V'hapetur, they're exempt to rak b'inyan kiyum b'maisa. We're only exempting them that the maisa they don't do it. Avon l'sinas ha-Torah mitzvah. But the giving of the Torah and mitzvahs, how they call out Torah mitzvahs, all of Torah mitzvahs, Gam mitzvahs Razman Groma, even mitzvahs I say the time bound, everything was given. Nitnu Gam Lenoshim, we'll give them to women too. The fact that they're not obligated to do them, that does not diminish giving and receiving it. Okay, they don't have to do it, but they got it all. So according to the Mechilta, women were not restricted. On the contrary, they got it all. They got the headlines. Later on, there's halacha that they're put from Zman Groma. That mitzvah says Zman Groma. So they don't have to do it, but they are connected to it. As opposed to the Medrash, they will have given only what they can hear, only what is applicable to them. The Rebbe says, this would be even sweetened based on what the Arizal writes. When the male does the mitzvah, so there's no need for the woman to do them by herself. Because she's already included when he does the mitzvah. So the mitzvah is done. Her husband does it. When the male does it, she is included in it. Abu Mitzvah says that they're not doing, they have the same obligation. U'Mesayim. And the Arizal concludes, this is the secret where our sages tell us the wife is like his body, meaning he does it. It's also she doing it. That man and a woman is each one a half a body. So when the other half a body does it, the other half does it as well. Now, what are you going to say about women that are not yet married or not married? This is not only benoshim nesuyos by married women, also Jewish women, Jewish daughters who have not yet married. Kivon, and since because a man and a woman together are one soul. Each one is a half a body. So even before you connect the two halves together, so the action of the man helps for his second half to the woman. So the woman doesn't know yet who her other half is, but it doesn't matter. Her half is being done, so that's still a plagufa. So that really means that the woman is actually obligated, or she has a shaykhis, and she's actually doing it, even though Pel Mamish, she's not doing it herself, but it's being done by the other half. Uh, hey, Apizeh yesh levayir hatam sherak b'mechilta magdim b'loshen Rashi Rako. In the mechilta before Rashi Prokim, he says b'loshen Rako, and then it says Rashi Prokim. We're explaining now Rashi Dvarim means in mechilta the generality. But Rosh Dvorim in the Medrash means condensed, only restricted what they can take. So the explanation is why is it Lashon Raka? Mashayim Medrash Lashon Raka Hainu Divrei Pius Kinal, which means words of encouragement of mitzvahs. V'yesh leimar, so we can say, the Rebbe says, the fact that we're saying the Rosh Dvorim are the generality, the connection to the essence of Torah, that itself are the Divrei Pius. Genau. V'yesh leimar shakavona leze gufa shenemer lehem shehem shayochas l'Rosh Dvorim. The intent is the word of peace is by telling them that they have a connection to the Rosh Dvorim. That is the essence of the Klal Torah. That's the Divrei Pius. Lashon Raka, Divrei Pius. What it means is, words of appeasement, tell them, look, Koi Somer Lebeis Yaakov, you are the general Torah connected to you. The Hainu Etzem Klal Torah, that you have a connection to Etzem and the rules of the Torah, generality of Torah. Al Pizeh, Mashakos, Ubemechilta, Lashon Raka, Amoir, Rosh Dvorim, Lashon Raka, say Rosh Dvorim, Hainu Shamiras Dvorim, Rosh Dvorim, Zeu HaLashon Raka. That saying the Rosh Dvorim, that becomes the Lashon Raka. Udleikin al Sif Aleph. Before in Sif Aleph, we said there's two things. He told them Pius, and he told the women, he told them the Rosh Dvorim, the headlines. But here, the Pius is the Rosh Dvorim. V'lochein, and therefore, Lamechil Teshebeseder Ze Nikeres Mailas Hanoshim Al Hanoshim. And according to the Mechilta, because in this order, by telling them the generality, you can tell the advantage of the women over the men. Sharak Lamamirim Rosh Dvorim. Only the women get the Rosh Dvorim, the generality. Klol HaTorah. Lachin mudgesh b'mechilta she'omer lenoshim b'loshon raka. That's why he says them in a loshon raka. Hamayle b'noshim alanoshim. This is an advantage of the women over the men. Loshon raka. Mashenkin la medrash lahepech. According to medrash, is the other way around. The advantage is the men. The women only get a partial, only a little bit, only Rosh Dvarim. Koi seimar. Lebeis Yaakov Moira ala Tzimtzum. That points to, that teaches on the restriction by Yerida shall divrei Torah l'noshim, that their descendant only got that. She'ein megalum lahem divrei Torah ka'anoshim, that they don't get the Torah like the men get. Ke'ein yichels l'shmoya kol kach, they can hear so much. So it's not. There's no point in saying divrei piyus that this is going to make them happy. There's no divrei piyus there. That's why the Medrash emits this expression of Lashon Raka, talking to them, appeasing them. How is that appeasing them? It's just fakert. We're saying that they can only get a little bit. That also, based on this, we also understand in the Medrash, the Rebbe is bringing down now, the Medrash, after the Medrash brings down the Pirush that Ein Megalhem only a little bit what they can hear, Mashenki, the men can hear more. So we also understand the language that after this Pirush Mamshich, the Medrash says, Davar Achar Lomo Lenoshim Techila. Why women first? Shem is darzes b'mitzvahs, because women are haste to do mitzvahs. That's what the Medrash explains. Why does the Medrash say Dover Achar, another? Before, we didn't talk about why women before men. That wasn't the discussion. The L'cheir in the movement. L'cheir is not understood. The Pirush Aleph Le'niskar Klal Advar Hagdomas Noshim LaNoshim. In the first interpretation of the Medrash, it doesn't talk about why women came before men. It doesn't talk about about that at all. Umal kavonas hamedrash. So what does the medrash mean? Dover achar lama lanoshim tchila. White woman first. We didn't talk about women first. But now that we're saying that the women were actually getting a less a restricted, so it turns out the Medrash wants to say that what's the difficulty in the first interpretation of Medrash? The key since we're only giving the women what they can hear, which means a very restricted amount, which is less than women. So why are they first? So why are they first? So Dover Achar Lochem Mefarish HaMedrash Yesh Inyan Shemitzad Zeh Anoshim Koidmis. There is an idea which women come first. Shehem is that is the mitzvahs that they are haste to do mitzvahs. So this saying Lomo, as if to say, but according to the first shot, we don't understand. Why do women come first? As a pshat is Lomo Noshim Tchila, because the Mizdaris is mitzvahs for another reason. But that's based on learning that the Medrash holds that the women were restricted; they were only given a lesser amount than the men. Omnom lepirush hasheni b'mechilta. But according to the second piece of the Mechilta, we understand very well. We know simply the women getting a lot more. Kizehu Seder, and that's the order. Seder is sinas divrei Torah. Shabbatchila boim klolei Torah. First come the rules of the Torah. Rosh Dvorim. And then the details. By Baseres Hadivros can Allah bring like before Baseres Hadivros. So that's why this also explains, according to the Mechilta, it's obvious why the Nashim come first because they get the klal and then you get the prat. According to the Medrash, women are getting less. Why did they come before the men? That's the difficulty in the first shot. That's why the Medrash gives the second shot. But according to the Mechilta, all the women are obligated in all the mitzvahs. It's just that not obligated. I mean, they're given everything and received everything, but the actual kiyum is by mitzvah shazman groma, as opposed to the medrash. They only got what is shaykhs to them. So, what is the connection now? We need to explain between women and the clothes. The Torah has to be given in such a way, but then you give it to the women the clothes. What's the connection? But this we need to explain. Lama la mechilta. Why, according to Mechilta, Nemru, Rosh Dvorim klola Torah l'noshim davke v'loy l'noshim. Why would the generality of Torah given only to the women, not to the men? Be'eshleimar, the Rebbe says, Shezeu behesem l'mayla klolis. This fits the general advantage of women over men, their connection, their emunah, and their connection to Hashem. They have a connection to the Torah even more than the men. Shezeu behesem l'mayla klolis shebatzina benoshim, a general advantage that we find by women legabe hanoshim being in avodas b'chlal relative to men in service of Hashem generally. The inna anuroim, for we always see she'etzel noshim yesh yoser begilu emuna b'Hashem b'yiras Hashem, that by women there is more openly the belief in Hashem and the fear of Hashem. Why is that? The open she'afsha tamlo ze begolihu. The open reason is lefi she'ein sichlum chazak kol kach. They don't have such a strong seichel, shalochein krevim yeser lekabel b'amuna pshuta. That's why they're more likely, they're closer to doing it with simple faith because they're not too sophisticated in their intellect. They do it without investigating. They believe, they follow. But that's the simple meaning. But the root of it is because by them shines that belief as it is from Hashem. And perhaps we can say this also can explain the reason in the way of lineage. how the Yichus goes, she'etzem v'klolus Yisrael, the essence and the general, a Yid, not with a Kohen, a Levi, that goes by the father, but generally a Yid are not tolui, dafke ba'im, it's hinges specifically in the mother. Sha'anelad la'im Yisraelis have Yisrael, if you're born to a Jewish mother, you are a Yid, gam k'sha'av ein Yehudi, even if the father is not Jewish. But only the details and the distinction within Yidden is Kohen Levi Yisrael, Pluyim Mishpachas Av. That is hinges in the family of the father, because the mother has a greater level of root. By her is the Amunah Kodesh Baruch Hu, and that goes to the child. Since the Torah mitzvahs were given to the Yidden, therefore to the mother, in which the sanctity of the Yid hinges on, the women got that special of the generality of Torah, the Rosh Dvorim. Shehem shayachim l'amuna. Those are connected to amuna. B'Hashem v'yiras Hashem chulu. Those are the general of Torah is to love Hashem, fear Hashem. That's the essence, the general of Torah. Shem klal kol Torah kulo. That's the rule, the generality of the entire Torah. Losh nakoso, the pasuk says, "Vayitzaveinu Hashem lasis es kol hachukim ha'elu liyiras Hashem gomer." Hashem commanded us to do all these statutes so that we fear Him. So the Eibishter gave her the general Torah, what brings the Avos Hashem Yiras of this main points of the Torah, the general of Torah. And to the father, in which the differences of the Jewish people, V'darges protis the Israel, and the specific levels of it, nitnu leibim yuchad adiktukim protim Torah mitzvahs, him was given specifically the details and the specifics of Torah mitzvahs. The Rebbe says, this is actually the reason itself, that the women are exempt from fulfilling the mitzvahs asay that are time bound. Because within mitzvahs, the prohibition and the mitzvahs are not zman groma, they had not been extended, and they did not come like the mitzvahs that are time bound. They've not limited in time. Mitzvahs are not time bound like the detailed of mitzvahs zman they are specifically in time. Therefore, women that are generally connected, especially to the general Torah mitzvahs, which are not so detailed, and they're not time bound because they have a more general connection, not just such a limited connection. And that's actually the reason why they don't have to do those mitzvahs which are time-bound, because they are more connected to the generality, which is not so restricted into the so specific time. Perhaps we can say, this is the idea of the Arizal explanation. There's no need for the women to do it on their own. Because they're included with the husband or with the man who does the other half, that does the mitzvah. Because this idea of doing in Torah mitzvahs, which is apula beprote hagbolas hazman, which is the actions in the details of time, that's shaykh leplagufa hasheni. That's the other half. Their half is the mitzvahs in general, and that's the other chelik hazochar shal neshama. That's the male part of the soul, the other part, and Her part is the general. The Inexiv, Pasuk says, Ki meitzeischom eretz Mitzrayim aren in the floors. Just as you, the days you went out of Egypt, I will show you wonders. The Kshem Shahoya B'Yitzias Mitzrayim. Just as it was in the Exodus of Egypt, the Schar, and there as a reward, the Sichos, the merit, Noshim Tzidkonius, the righteous women, Shebe Oisei Hadoir, of that generation, Nigalo Yisro Mitzrayim, the Yidden were redeemed of Mitzrayim. Al Yidei Zeh, so it's the women that brought about the Geula. And through the Geula, Kiblu Kol Bnei Yisrael Satorim. All Yidden received the Torah. The Behitziach HaShom Mitzrayim Tabnes Ha'olikim HaHorazeh, Moshe Rabbeinu said that when you take out the people of Mitzrayim, you will serve Hashem. Everybody will serve Hashem. Keinu V'Geula Hasida Lovei. Likewise is in the redemption of the future to come. Shebeschus Noshim Tzidkonis, and the merit of the righteous woman. Yoitzi Magolus Hazeh, we exit this, go out of this exile. Bezoichin, and we merit Lilmei Torah Mashiach, to study, to learn the teaching of Mashiach. Shelamades Torah is called Ha'am Kulei. He will be teaching Torah to the entire nation. Lemiktanim ad Gedolim, the young to the old. Shelemuda Yih Boifon Sheleria. He's going to teach in a way you're seeing, which means he will learn the general, that everything will be seen in the main without the details. That in the future, the essence, the Pnimis HaTorah, will be revealed. Okay, a very detailed Sicha, and needs to be studied again and again. And this will do it for now.